We all think we know the story of the Titanic, right? The iceberg, the sinking, that whole tragedy. But what if I told you that's only half the story? Turns out there's a whole other side to it, a modern tale filled with secrets, incredible deep sea tech, and a discovery that was actually a cover for a top secret Cold War mission. So that leads us to a pretty wild question, doesn't it? How on earth did a secret Cold War mission end up finding the world's most famous shipwreck? It sounds like something out of a spy movie, connecting this massive historical disaster to the high-stakes world of espionage. Well, the answer is just as fascinating, and it all comes down to how a hunt for lost nuclear submarines, yeah, you heard that right, accidentally led explorers right to the Titanic. All right, so let's get into it. And believe it or not, our story doesn't kick off in 1912. Nope. We're going to fast forward way ahead to the 1980s. This is during the super tense final years of the Cold War. By this point, the Titanic has been gone for over 70 years. Just a ghost ship, a legend resting somewhere at the bottom of the North Atlantic. Now, the main character in this part of the saga is this guy, Dr. Robert Ballard. He's a brilliant oceanographer and also a retired U.S. Navy officer. But for Ballard, there was one thing that drove him more than anything else. He had this lifelong obsession with finding the Titanic. I mean, he even tried once before, back in 1977, but it didn't work out. So now he's more determined than ever. He's got a new plan, he's got new tech, but he's missing the one thing you always need: money. And this is where the story gets really cloak and dagger. See, the U.S. Navy had some deep-sea secrets of its own. Back in the 60s, two of their nuclear attack submarines, the USS Thresher and the USS Scorpion, had just vanished. Poof. Gone. And the Navy was, you can imagine, desperate to find these wrecks. It wasn't just about figuring out what went wrong. They absolutely had to check on the nuclear reactors to make sure they weren't leaking radioactive material into the ocean. So this is where Ballard saw his opening. He goes to the Navy with this top secret deal. He says, look, you fund my expedition. Let me use my new deep-sea robot, Argo. In return, my official, classified mission will be to find your lost subs. But here's the kicker. The Titanic, his personal obsession, that was the real prize. The deal was if, and only if, he found their subs and had time left over, then he could go look for the Titanic. Okay, so we've set the Cold War scene. But what was Ballard even looking for? I mean, to really get the scale of his mission, we've got to rewind. Let's go back 73 years to that one fateful night when the legend of the Titanic was born in ice and tragedy. The night the so-called unsinkable ship went down. I mean, it all happened so fast, it's terrifying to even think about. At 11:40 p.m., the lookout screams, "Iceberg, right ahead!" Just 1 minute later, 60 seconds, you hear that awful, grinding sound as ice rips through steel. Less than half an hour later, the captain gets the worst news possible. The ship has less than 2 hours. And that's it. In just 2 hours and 40 minutes, the Titanic is gone, slipped beneath the waves forever. Just look at this. This image, it really drives home the sheer scale of what happened. You've got this floating palace, all lit up, just sliding into the dark abyss. And the people in those few lifeboats, all they could do was just sit there and watch in absolute horror. And the human cost, it's just staggering. Over 1,500 people, passengers, crew, they all lost their lives that night in the freezing North Atlantic. But, a number like that is hard to wrap your head around. Behind that number are so many individual stories. Like this one, a third-class survivor from Finland. She was traveling with her husband, Pekko, to start a new life in America. She got pulled into a lifeboat, and she remembered just hearing these horrible screams coming from the water, and her own voice just calling out his name, Pekko, Pekko, over and over into the dark. She never saw him again. So for decades now, people have been trying to make sense of this massive tragedy. And in doing so, one question keeps popping up. It's a question that sounds logical on the surface, like maybe there was a simple way out of this impossible mess. And that question is, why didn't people just climb onto the iceberg? I mean, it sounds logical, doesn't it? The thing that caused all the trouble was right there, a giant island of ice. Why not just climb on and use it as a makeshift life raft? Well, the icy reality of that night made that completely impossible. For starters, you have to remember the Titanic didn't just hit the iceberg and stop. It was a massive ship. It kept drifting for kilometers. So the iceberg was basically a moving target in the pitch-black night. And second, icebergs aren't these nice flat platforms. They're steep, they're super slippery, and trying to climb on in the dark would have been a nightmare. And probably the most crucial part, the danger wasn't obvious right away. A lot of people actually felt safer on the big, well-lit, unsinkable ship than they did getting into a tiny little lifeboat. Add to that the absolute chaos, especially for third-class passengers. One survivor even talked about how the doors were locked, trapping people below deck. It was just an impossible situation. And here's the absolute gut-wrenching irony of the whole disaster. The one move they made to try and save the ship is what actually doomed it. If they had hit the iceberg head-on, it would have been bad, for sure. But it probably would have only flooded 2, maybe 4 of the watertight compartments. And guess what? The Titanic was built to survive that. But by turning, they got that sideswipe. That long gash breached 6 compartments, 2 more than the ship could handle. That turn, it was a death sentence.
Okay, so let's jump back to 1985. Robert Ballard has done it. He's completed his top secret mission for the Navy. But now the clock is ticking. He's only got 12 days left. The real hunt, the one he's been dreaming about his whole life, is finally on.
And Ballard had this absolutely brilliant new strategy, something he learned from his secret mission finding those subs. See, he knew those submarines had imploded from the insane pressure down there, and they left a long trail of debris. He thought, hey, maybe the Titanic did something similar as it broke apart. So instead of looking for the ship itself, which was like finding a needle in a haystack, he decided to look for the debris field. It was like looking for a trail of breadcrumbs that would lead him right to the main wreck. So for days, the team is just glued to their screens, watching the live feed from Argo as it scans the ocean floor. And then, in the early hours of September 1st, they see something. Not the ship, not at first, just a piece of debris. And then another piece. And then, looming out of the darkness, one of the Titanic's massive boilers. There was no mistaking it. A little while later, the hull itself appeared. After 73 years, they had found it. You really can't overstate what a huge achievement this was. The Titanic rests at a depth of 3,600 meters. To put that in perspective, that is over 3.5 kilometers straight down. It's a world with crushing pressure, absolute darkness, an environment that is just completely hostile to any form of human life. But for Ballard, finding the wreck wasn't just some big discovery. To him, he had found a grave site. And right from the very start, he was absolutely insistent that nothing should be taken. He didn't see it as a treasure chest full of artifacts. He saw it as a cemetery, a memorial for the more than 1,500 souls who died there. And, Ballard's position on this brings up a really big question, one that people are still debating today. Because since he found it, other expeditions have gone down and brought up thousands of artifacts, things that are now in museums for millions of people to see. But it forces us to ask a tough question. What's the right way to remember a tragedy like this? Is a shipwreck like the Titanic a historical treasure to be recovered and studied? Or is it a sacred gravesite, a tombstone that should be left in peace at the bottom of the ocean?